Hi everyone, it's Fiona here, and I'm all on my own for sipping chai today. And that is because Sachin and I have bitten off such a great big topic to talk about that last week when we sat down for our recording, we talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and realized that there's just so much to share that we need to have another opportunity or even more and more and more and more. So I am here to share with you the content of what we'd like to talk about and set the scene for us navigating our way through this gloriously rich topic over the next few weeks of sipping chai. So let me share the screen with you and reveal what it is that's so big that we couldn't even record a session about it. Here we go. The mind in Vedic astrology. This is something that I have been wanting to talk about for ages because as I'm learning Vedic astrology and I'm going along, when we get to semester 2 of the first year, we start learning the houses. And I hear, some of the houses are associated with the mind. And then we get to topic 3 of the first year, and I start hearing about the planets, and some of the planets are associated with the mind. And before long, I've got lots and lots of indicators for the mind, but I haven't really taken the time to tease them out and fit them onto the other models of the mind that I like to use when I'm talking about Vedic astrology and Vedic thought when I life coach with people. So I've been wanting to get my teeth into this topic, and this opportunity has arisen. And so here we go. And I put together these slides so that we could, Sachin and I could, have something to ground us in this conversation. But even these slides were not enough, and I'll share all of that with you. But perhaps where we can begin is to acknowledge that although it's true that in Vedic astrology there are lots of indicators for the mind and can get a little confusing, actually it's pretty confusing anyway, just in our day-to-day language about the mind. There's not a lot of clarity really in our Western culture about what is the mind. So for example, we hear this, the mind is a phrase that we use in daily language, the brain and the intellect, but we don't really have a good sense of where they are in relation to each other. Like, is the mind in the head? Is the mind in the body? It's all a bit unclear. Then we've got the unconscious, we've got the subconscious, we've got this concept in Western European thought that I am thinking, and that comes from that famous "I think, therefore I am." Part of the whole Reformation and the rational thought that has helped propel that Western European thinking into that scientific and discoveries and lots of the technologies and everything. So it's really had a profound effect, but it has very much attached the ego to thinking, and that I'm a thinker. Those thoughts, I'm creating my thoughts, which I wonder if that's true. So there we have it, the ego coming in there as well. And then sometimes you hear the id and the super id, so there's a lot of ways of describing the mind, even in just daily language, let alone in karakas and indicators for astrology. But this leaves us with questions like, where is consciousness? Like in Western thought, in Western science, where is it? Is it in the brain? Is consciousness and the brain, they're the same thing? Are they separated? Like when we're brain dead, are we dead, or are we still conscious but our brain is not functioning, so the consciousness can't connect through the brain? Where is this consciousness? We can't really point to it. Can you see the mind on an MRI? We've learned so much now about the brain mapping through the MRI. When we think about various things or recall things or hear sounds, you can just see the MRI light up in different areas. So, but is that the mind? and therefore, is it neurons? Is that what the mind is? Is it all those neurons connected become more than the neurons themselves? Then we've got, what is dreaming? Like, I'm consciously awake half the day, but for another whole half of every day, I'm not consciously awake. I am, to some extent, watching my mind create images for myself, and I'm dreaming. And I can do things in my dreams that I can't do in real life, but I have all the sensations as if I was doing them in real life. So what is dreaming? What is daydreaming? That thing that we stare off into I've got a beautiful view here of the river and the ocean, and you stare off and there's something happening in your mind, but you're not really following it very clearly, but it's kind of incredibly refreshing. And there's something innately good about daydreaming. But what is that? And this whole thing of, who am I? If I think, therefore I am, who is it that's watching those thoughts? How can I be having the thoughts and be aware of the thoughts? What about those thoughts that I have that I don't even understand or are not possible, or sometimes I'm repulsed or whatever by the thoughts that I have? And am I really those? And does the brain produce the mind? Does the brain produce consciousness? So all of these questions float around anyway, regardless of whether you're talking about Vedic astrology indicators. We can definitely say that it is hard to define the mind and consciousness and the intellect, even though we are that and we are having that experience all the time. So I find that fascinating. And when I talk to people in coaching about the mind, I find a couple of models from Vedic philosophy really helpful. And one is Sankhya, which is the journey of consciousness into matter. And I love that it is so bold, audacious to think that we can map consciousness from its unmanifest state all the way through to the earth and the worms and everything that's, very physical about our experience here. And we won't go into this too much today because I think this is where our conversation is going to build, but maybe a few key things to highlight is that a sense of motion coming into, imagine that all consciousness is completely still in that unmanifest state, absolutely static. Everything that consciousness is, like, I guess it's before the Big Bang, if we were to kind of think about it like that, that stillness of almost non-existence before manifestation. And then this prakriti comes through, which is this urge to exist. And from that motion falls out instantly, consciousness begins to sort itself into more and more dense versions of consciousness until it's actually physical matter. And that's what's happening here. So after that initial impulse to create, to exist, to play, instantly falls out Mahad, the supreme or creative intelligence. And inside of that is Buddhi, the individual intellect. And straight below that, step number 3 is ahamkara, the I am ego. And all of these things are still above that blue line, the light blue line, of the gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas. But as soon as we get to the I am, and we begin to separate from the objects that we're interacting with, we're seeing I am here, I'm different from that thing that's over there. Then come the gunas and all of this more physical manifestation, like manas, the mind, cognition and action, and all of these sensory faculties, our motor faculties, all the objects of the material world and the elements. So Again, not going into it because Sachin and I will pick that apart. But I love this idea that consciousness is kind of becoming more and more dense, and that our mind, our consciousness, our intellect is in that early part of consciousness becoming more manifest. So that I use it in coaching when we want to move our vibration up and down Sankhya to heal the body and the mind. And when we want to solve a problem that is perhaps we're stuck at a particular level of frequency, this guiding chart helps us to generally move up. So there's more sattva, there's more lightness, there's more expansiveness, and we can be with a problem or a trauma, an obstacle, but see it in a whole new way, interact with it at a different level of consciousness, and that can just ripple down and change the actual manifest experience that we're having. So, love to use that model in coaching. Let me just plug in my computer here. And the other model I love to use is here on the right, the 4 functions of the mind. If we can imagine the self in the center of the experience of the mind, there are these 4 functions that are happening. And to keep it super simple, we can talk about manas as maybe being the sensory mind, the ability to take in from this manifest material world, to take in sensory experience through the nerves that are allowing us to interact with the material existence. Just amazing. These nerves need a place to send their message to, and that place needs to be able to connect with these sensory receptors. And this is all coming down here into the 5 to 9 sensory faculties and the objects of sensory perception. So we'll talk about that more, but obviously we need a place to turn our nerve interaction with material into mind stuff, and that is through manas, receiving. And that is why it can be incredibly calming for the mind when we actually give our attention to the sensory experience. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. Then all of these sensory experiences get stored over time in the citta. So we record what we are learning through the experience of the senses. So the classic, put your hand on the flame and somewhere inside of you, you record that. And over time, obviously, there's a lot of stuff in the citta. And then over here in the ahamkara, we have the I am, the I story. This is like the soap opera creator, the soap opera script writer of our existence. It is the ego telling all of life, this amazing creation of the spontaneous expression of joy in the material world through me, the most important character on this whole drama that's taking place. So we need that ego to, as I live in a football mad country, we need that ego is like our number on our jersey, so we know whether we're a forward or we're a defender or we're a goalkeeper. When we know our position on the field, we can play a great game of football, because then the opposing team is also, they know their positions, and then we're really interacting with equals and we're having a game. We're outwitting each other, we're outskilling each other, we're playing for our own delight. So it is important that we have an I am, a sense of my jersey, but it's also really important to remember to take that we can take the jersey off at any time, that we're not always Cristiano Ronaldo, the most important football player, at the front of the team. We can take that jersey off and just be in existence. So sometimes we're over attached to our story, and that ahamkara uses these chitta experiences, the memory bank, to create stories about our identity. And this gives us feelings about ourselves. We feel proud of ourselves, or we feel down about ourselves. We feel motivated, we feel scared, because the scriptwriter for this soap opera has an enormous data bank of experiences that, were brilliant and were embarrassing, and you name it, the whole gamut, scary, romantic, the whole deal. So unfortunately, we tend to spend a lot of time running back and forth between the person creating the story about me and these memories that we have, these identity memories. And from these stories that are finished and they're in the past, their hamkara is making our future, because we are looking into the world through that drama of the soap opera and walking around playing that character, having our own secret relationships and, grudges and ongoing dialogue with these characters that are mostly in our chitta, and don't possibly even exist out there. But we're having the whole emotional, biochemical experience because we're really in the drama. Which brings us to buddhi here, which is the other function in the four function model, that is the chooser and the intellect and what I select to put my focus on. And unfortunately, left to our own devices on automatic, we're a little bit running along this horizontal plane. And how beautiful it is for the mind, for our experience, when we begin to run along this vertical plane where we observe through our senses what we are receiving, and we keep our focus in the present moment. So that chooser, that intellect, keeps the attention in the now, because ahamkara and chitta, they are having conversations about the past and the future. This manas buddhi conversation is the only one that's taking place in the now. It's a very refreshing for the experience of the mind. So these are two models from Vedic philosophy that I like to use when I speak to people. I think they can be very helpful in learning how to work with our own mind and getting ourselves out of our drama and having powerful tools to stay in the present where joy is abundant and happening at all times. Okay, so this is part of the framework for our discussion with Sachin for some sipping of chai. And that brings us to astrology as the study of the mind. Where is it that we see these indicators of the mind in astrology? And I've got them covered up here. Give you a chance. I'm going to sip some chai while Sachin's not here. Give you a chance to see, what do you think is behind each of these covered houses and planets, and why do you think they're on the list? So when I'm in astrology, in Vedic astrology, these are the things that I hear about indicators as the mind. I'm going to throw them all up here, and then I'm going to look forward to discussing all of this with Sachin, and we will refine this list. But I really enjoyed the process of getting out from my notes all of these different little pepperings that I've heard about the mind. So tell me whether you agree. Which one of these planets do you think I'm going to reveal first as the main indicator that you hear associated with the mind in Vedic astrology? I think the main one that you hear is the moon. Moon is called Manas. Is it the Ahamkara? Is it the egoic mind, what I think of myself, the emotional mind, mental afflictions, mental happiness, mental motivation, intellectual capacity, the intelligence, the imagination, and early memories? So from all of my notes, these are the kind of things that I've written down. And often you will hear that the moon is the mind. However, you will also hear that Mercury is the mind. We call Mercury Buddha, in Vedic astrology sometimes. Does that mean it's Buddhi? Often you'll hear that Mercury is about mental perception, good memory, doubt, the inquiring mind. It's about logic. It's about detailed thought, digging into things, critical thinking, discrimination, wit, and analysis. So kind of a different flavor from the moon for the mind. And then the Mars, you get to hear Mars as the mind. It's a quick mind. It's a sharp mind. It's our mental action, mental power, and logic. So we hear the moon, Mercury, Mars. We hear sun. Is sun the Mahad? It is creative intelligence, and we often attribute an intelligent person, that there's something solar about that. Then we have Jupiter is another planet that gets associated with the mind, exceptional intelligence, wisdom, compassion or optimism. So kind of like that outlook that Jupiter gives us, philosophical mind, contemplative mind, and physically the brain, right? So a few planets now vying for the mix. And then I love to add in Rahu because it's obscuring the mind and it's confusion, which, let's face it, is often an experience that we have in the mind. And Ketu, the mental plane itself, deep thinking, mental disillusionment, and detached discrimination. So is that the list of planets that you also associate in Vedic astrology with the mind? And do you put those indicators the way that I have or not? Do you agree or disagree? I'm really interested. Let's put this into our collective thinking space, and come back and talk about this all, refine this list after our big discussion. Okay, now not only do you hear that planets are the mind, but sometimes you hear that houses are the mind. Now, we have to say up front that houses obviously are not conscious. These are areas where karma is being experienced. So whereas planets are the conscious initiators of karma, the players, the actors, the houses are like the stage sets where these actors are playing out their roles. But some of them have a mental flavor. See if you agree with me. Third house, hear this a lot. Third house, what the mind thinks about, ideas and interests. It's the practical mind. Is it the personal mind? The mind expressed, the hands-on intelligence, memory, and mental strength. Okay. The fifth house is also the mind, but is it more the universal mind? Is it a bigger, more expansive sense of mind than the third house mind? Obviously related to mental creativity, to intellect, intelligence, and the religious mind. So I would say I hear those the most, third house, fifth house. However, we also get the 12th house, right? Contemplation, transcendental mind, our dreams and our daydreams, which, let's face it, there's a lot of time we spend dreaming, and it's definitely associated with the 12th house. So there must be some mind stuff there. Can also be mental agitation and anguish. And the first house relates to intelligence and self-intelligence, as does the fifth house. We already talked about that. The sixth house is the things we worry about, or our worries, which is all going on in the mind. And the eighth house can be mental pain and suffering. And the ninth house can be our intelligence as well. So you can see how that's spread out through these houses, and perhaps is related to meditation. So tell me what you think, or think what you think, and write down something, or follow us next time we get together with Sachin. How do you put together this matrix of the mind in Vedic astrology and what all of the indicators are? And is there any way that we can map this back to either Sankhya or to the four functions of the mind? So this is what I set up in my conversation to begin with Sachin last week when we started recording. And he was generous enough to share with me another diagram that kind of integrates my two diagrams and astrology. So let's briefly share that with you. This is from Sri Yukteswar, and you can see that it has the buddhi, manas, chitta, and ego. And it has the sattva, rajas, and tamas. It has the causal body, astral body, physical body, and so many more elements in this model. So over the coming weeks, Sachin and I are going to unpack this model and delineate what's happening as we move down the model, and also link it back to those planets and maybe to those houses. I don't know if that's going to work or not. Oops. So I invite you to think about your experience of learning Vedic astrology and your practice. How do you understand the mind? How have you kind of organize this for yourself? And bring that along in the comments, or send us some messages. And I look forward to having my normal conversation, sipping chai with Sachin, and talking about the mind in Vedic astrology over the next several weeks. I hope you'll join me. I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, until then, stay well and let me know what you think. Okay, bye.